The storm and the birth. The wind screamed across the mountains like a living thing. Snow spun in the air, white and furious, blinding the world in every direction. Somewhere in that endless white wilderness, a small cabin clung to the side of a ridge, half buried beneath the storm, the chimney barely breathing smoke. Inside, a single lantern flickered, fighting the darkness. Mary Whitfield pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling another contraction tear through her. Her breath caught, and she leaned against the rough wooden wall, eyes shut tight. The pain was sharp and deep, but there was no one to help her. No midwife, no husband, no soul within miles. Only the wind. Her husband, Thomas, had gone 3 days ago, riding toward the nearest town to fetch a doctor when the early snow began. He had promised he'd return before nightfall. That night had come and gone, and 2 more with it. Now the blizzard had swallowed everything. Mary had stopped counting the hours. All she could do was breathe and pray. "Please, Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "don't let them come into this world alone." The cabin creaked. The wind wailed. Another contraction hit, harder than before, and Mary collapsed to her knees. Her fingers clawed at the floorboards as she gasped for air. Sweat ran down her forehead despite the freezing cold. She had been strong once, the kind of woman the frontier respected. Born in Kansas, raised with calloused hands and a stubborn heart, she had followed Thomas west to Montana, chasing the promise of land, of freedom. But freedom, she had learned, was a hard teacher. It asked for everything, her comfort, her safety, and now maybe her life. Hours passed. The lantern burned low. Snow pressed against the windows, muffling the world into silence. The cabin had turned into a coffin of cold wood and fading light. Then, the sound she'd feared the most. The wind outside shifted, and the door groaned under pressure. The blizzard had grown angrier. Snow pushed through the cracks, dusting the floor in white. Mary crawled toward the bed, clutching a wool blanket, her body trembling with exhaustion. She wasn't just fighting the cold now. She was fighting time. A cry broke the silence. Not from her, but from life. The first baby arrived just before dawn, as light began to bleed weakly through the snowstorm. Mary held the tiny form in her trembling hands, wrapping it in her shawl. Tears froze on her cheeks as she pressed the baby to her chest. But the contractions hadn't stopped. There was another, then another. By the time the second and third came, she had no strength left. Her breaths came in shallow gasps. She looked at the 3 small bundles beside her. 3 miracles, born in the middle of nowhere, while death itself howled outside. Her lips quivered in a weak smile. "They're beautiful," she whispered to no one. Then she slumped against the bedpost, eyes fluttering closed. The storm raged on. Far away, through the blinding snow, a figure moved slowly along the ridge. Ranger Ethan Cole had been out for 2 days, searching for missing travelers rumored to be stranded in the high pass. His horse stumbled through deep snow, nostrils steaming, both man and beast weary. Through his frostbitten scarf, Ethan muttered, "Come on, girl, just a little farther." He didn't expect to find anyone alive out here, but when the wind dropped for a moment, he thought he heard something, faint and distant, a sound too soft to be the storm. A cry, like a child's. He froze, listening. Then it came again, muffled, weak, but real. Without hesitation, he urged his horse forward, pushing against the storm until he saw it. A half-buried cabin, almost invisible beneath the snow. He dismounted, stumbled to the door, and pushed it open. The hinges screamed. The lantern inside had nearly died. And then he saw her, a woman lying motionless on the floor, her skin pale, her hair dusted with frost. Beside her, wrapped in torn blankets, were 3 tiny infants, their breath shallow but steady. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. He just stood there, staring, unable to believe what he was seeing. A miracle. In all his years riding the frontier, chasing outlaws, facing the wild, he had never seen anything like this. He dropped to his knees, checking the woman's pulse. It was weak, but there. She was alive, barely. "Ma'am," he whispered hoarsely. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. She saw him, a stranger in a ranger's coat, snow clinging to his beard, and for a brief second, her lips moved. They made it, she breathed. Then she went still again. Ethan's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, looking down at the babies. They were so small, yet somehow they'd survived the night. Through a storm that could freeze cattle solid. He wrapped them tighter, tucking them close to their mother. He knew he couldn't stay here long. The storm would bury the cabin completely before nightfall. He had to move, had to get them to safety. But first, he did something he hadn't done in years. He bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't know what this is supposed to mean, but if you brought me here, help me get them home." He gathered the woman in his arms, carefully bundling the 3 newborns in his coat. Outside, the snow howled again, but the wind seemed to ease just a little, as if the mountain itself was watching. Ethan mounted his horse, holding all 4 of them close, and turned toward the valley. Behind them, the cabin disappeared beneath the snow, but life had already escaped its frozen walls. And somewhere deep inside Ethan Cole's chest, a spark of warmth began to stir, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, the ranger, and the miracle. The trail down from the ridge was nearly gone, buried under feet of new snow. Ranger Ethan Cole could barely see beyond his horse's mane as he pushed through the blizzard. The woman in his arms was limp and cold, her breaths faint against his chest. The 3 newborns, wrapped inside his coat, barely stirred, only the softest whimper to remind him they were still alive. Every step felt like a war against the mountain. He whispered to his horse, "Easy, girl, keep moving. Don't stop for nothing." The mare snorted, her flanks steaming in the icy wind. She stumbled, caught herself, and trudged forward again. Ethan's face burned from frostbite, his beard crusted with ice. But he refused to stop. He'd seen too many graves in this wilderness, too many bodies that never made it home. He wasn't about to add 4 more to that list. By dusk, the blizzard began to ease. The world turned a pale gray. Ghostly trees rising out of white hills, their branches heavy with snow. Ethan spotted the faint outline of a ranger outpost ahead, smoke curling weakly from its chimney. He nearly collapsed from relief. Kicking open the door, he stumbled inside, the sudden heat hitting him like a hammer. He laid the woman and babies near the fire, tearing off his gloves to check their pulses again. The babies were breathing, slow, fragile, but alive. The woman's skin was icy, her lips blue. Ethan rubbed her hands, her face, anything to bring warmth back. He poured water into a tin cup and held it to her mouth. "Come on, miss," he murmured. "You didn't fight that storm to give up now." For a moment, nothing happened. Then she coughed. A weak, rasping sound, but enough to make Ethan's heart leap. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed and unfocused. Where am I?" she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly, exhausted. "You're safe, ma'am. You're at a ranger station near Timberline Ridge. You've been through hell, but you and your little ones made it." Her eyes moved toward the small bundles near the fire. When she heard the soft cries, tears filled her eyes. All 3. All 3, he said quietly. "Stronger than any of us." She let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. "Thomas, my husband, he went for help." Ethan hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I'll send word to the town at first light. If he made it through, they'll find him." She nodded weakly, closing her eyes. For the next 2 days, the cabin became a cradle of life amid a world of snow. Ethan nursed the fire around the clock, melting snow for water, boiling what little food he had left. He fed the woman broth spoon by spoon, warmed milk for the infants, and built a shelter for the horse just outside. The blizzard passed, leaving behind a silence so deep that even the mountains seemed to hold their breath. The woman's strength slowly returned. Her name, he learned, was Mary Whitfield. One night, when the storm finally cleared and stars returned to the sky, she sat near the fire, holding one of her babies, a tiny girl wrapped in a wool blanket, and looked at Ethan with quiet gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You saved us." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't save you. You did that yourself. I just showed up in time to see what real courage looks like." She smiled faintly, the firelight reflecting in her tired eyes. "You talk like a man who's seen too much." He paused, staring into the flames. "I've seen enough, ma'am. Lost enough, too. He didn't tell her everything about his wife, Sarah, who had died 5 winters ago when fever took the valley, about how he'd buried her beneath a pine tree overlooking the plains. Since then, Ethan had lived like the land itself, cold, quiet, and alone. But now, in this tiny cabin filled with the soft breathing of 3 newborns, something was thawing inside him. By the 3rd day, the sky turned blue, the kind of blue that promised spring was somewhere ahead. Ethan saddled his horse and prepared to ride to the nearest town for supplies and word of Thomas. Before leaving, he looked back at Mary. She was sitting by the window, sunlight falling across her face. One of the babies slept against her shoulder, the other 2 bundled together beside her. "Don't worry," he said gently. "I'll be back before dark." She looked up, her voice trembling. "Be careful, Ranger." He nodded, tipping his hat, and rode out into the snow. The trail to town was long and frozen, but Ethan knew the way. He reached Timberline by noon, a small, wind-beaten settlement of log houses and smokestacks. At the ranger office, he delivered his report and asked about a man named Thomas Whitfield. The clerk frowned, flipping through the register. There was a man by that name found 3 days back, near Red Hollow. Didn't make it. Ethan's hand went still on the counter. He stared at the snow falling outside the window, silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Then I suppose the mountain took him, but she doesn't know yet." He gathered supplies, food, blankets, medicine, and rode back toward the cabin, his heart heavy and cold again. When he reached the ridge, the sun was sinking, painting the world in gold and crimson. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin but steady. Inside, Mary turned when he entered. "You found him?" she asked immediately, hope lighting her face. Ethan hesitated at the door, snow melting off his coat. His throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to spare her the pain, but the truth was too heavy to hide. He took off his hat, holding it to his chest. "Mary, I'm sorry. He didn't make it." The silence that followed was deeper than the storm had ever been. Mary closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. The baby stirred in her arms, and she clutched the child tighter. Ethan knelt beside her. "He tried, ma'am. He went down fighting the cold, looking for help. He didn't give up on you." She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Neither did you." Days passed. The mountains softened under spring's first breath. Mary began to walk outside, holding her children against the light, whispering their names, Hope, Grace, and Thomas Jr. Ethan helped her build a sled for the journey down to the valley, where a wagon would take her to the settlement. He fixed the harness, packed her things, and saddled his mare. When it was time to leave, Mary looked at him for a long while. "Will you come with us?" she asked quietly. Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that had been gone from his face for years. "The frontier always needs a ranger, ma'am. But maybe. I'll come by Timberline once in a while. Make sure the little ones grow up strong." She nodded, eyes shining. "You gave us more than our lives, Ranger. You gave us a future." He tipped his hat. "You gave me something too, ma'am. You reminded me what it feels like to believe again." As the sled began to move, the baby's cries echoed softly in the cold air, 3 small voices rising into the mountains. Ethan stood watching until they disappeared down the trail, the sun glinting off the snow like gold. He turned toward the ridge, the wind brushing his face gently now, no longer a scream, but a whisper of life. He looked up at the pale sky and murmured, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me see hope one more time." Then Ranger Ethan Cole mounted his horse and rode back into the wilderness, his heart lighter than the snowflakes, drifting through the golden light of dawn.